It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The morning air was crisp, laced with the scent of blooming roses from my mother's garden, a reminder of her presence in spirit. I stood before the full-length mirror in my old bedroom, the white gown cascading around me like a dream. My reflection stared back, a mix of excitement and nervousness. I could hear the distant laughter and chatter of guests arriving, the soft hum of the string quartet setting the mood. Today, I, Kate Miller, was marrying Ethan, the man I thought was the love of my life. As I made my way down the aisle, clinging to my father's arm, my heart swelled at the sight of Ethan waiting for me, his eyes brimming with emotion. But lurking in the shadow of that joy was his mother, my soon-to-be mother, in-law, Marianne. Her gaze, unlike the warm, welcoming stares of the other guests, was cold and sharp, cutting through the jubilance of the moment. The ceremony was a blur of vows and cheers, but the reception that followed was where the day took a turn. Marianne, draped in her navy blue dress, seemed to have a mission to dampen the spirit of our celebration. I tried to brush off her subtle jabs and forced smiles, focusing instead on the love and support around us. But as the evening progressed, her mask of civility began to slip. I was at the buffet table when I overheard her speaking to one of the guests. "She's a pretty thing, isn't she? But between us, I don't think she's quite right for Ethan. Too plain, too." "Ordinary for our family," Marianne whispered, not knowing I was within earshot. I felt a sting in my heart, but I composed myself and confronted her with a smile. "Marianne, I hope you're enjoying the evening." She turned, her smile thin and unconvincing. "Okay, darling. I was just telling Helen here how unique your dress is. Not what I would have chosen, but then again, we all have different taste, don't we?" I nodded, biting back a sharper retort. "Yes, we do. And I'm glad Ethan loves my taste." Later, as Ethan and I shared our first dance, I tried to shake off the unease. But Marianne's words echoed in my mind. "You'll never be good enough for my son," she had hissed during one of our quieter, more menacing exchanges. It was a sentence that would haunt me far beyond the wedding day. As the night came to a close and we bid our guests goodbye, Ethan remained oblivious to the storm clouds that had gathered in my heart. He swept me into his arms, whispering how perfect the day had been. But as I rested my head on his shoulder, a part of me wondered, was it really perfect? Or was it the beginning of a nightmare dressed as a fairy tale? Leaving the remnants of our wedding day behind, Ethan and I stepped into a new chapter of our lives. The house I had inherited from my parents, a quaint two-story Victorian home nestled in the suburbs, was now our sanctuary, or so I thought. The first few weeks were like a dream. We unpacked, decorated, and I often found myself lost in the memories of my childhood, each corner of the house whispering stories of a past filled with love and laughter. Ethan seemed to love the house too, often remarking how lucky we were to have such a beautiful place to call our own. But the dream began to crumble when Marianne and her daughter, my sister-in-law, Anna, started their frequent visits. It began subtly, a comment here about the color of the living room walls, a slight there about how the garden was kept. I tried to remain gracious, reminding myself that adjustment takes time. One evening, as we all sat in a living room, the air thick with the scent of the jasmine tea I had brewed, Marianne's criticisms became more direct. "This house is charming, Kate, but don't you think the living room would look better with more modern furniture?" she said, her eyes scanning the room disapprovingly. I forced a smile. "Ethan and I love these pieces, Marianne. They were my parents. They hold a lot of sentimental value." Marianne clucked her tongue. "Sentiment is sweet, dear, but sometimes you need to embrace change, especially when you marry into a family like ours." Ethan, sitting beside me, remained silent, his gaze fixed on his phone. I felt a twinge of disappointment at his lack of support. The visits grew more frequent, and with each one, Marianne and Anna's comments turned from subtly undermining to openly hostile. I would often find them rearranging my kitchen or criticizing the way I chose to decorate. Anna, echoing her mother, was no less forgiving. One afternoon, as I was setting up lunch, Anna walked in, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "You know, Kate, a woman's touch in the kitchen can really turn a house into a home. Seems like you're still learning that touch, huh?" I bit back my frustration. "I'm doing my best, Anna. I thought Ethan loved my cooking." She shrugged, smirking. "Men always say that, don't they? Until they get tired of it." Their words, like tiny needles, pricked at my confidence, slowly unraveling the tapestry of my happiness. Ethan, who I thought would be my ally, my partner, slowly receded into a shell of indifference. When I tried to express my hurt, he dismissed it as overreaction. "Kate, they're just trying to help," he'd say. "You're reading too much into it." But the house that once felt like a haven began to feel like a battleground, with each visit from Marianne and Anna turning into a subtle war of words and wills. I lay awake many nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the home filled with my parents' love could turn into a stage for such coldness. How the man I married, who promised to love and protect me, could stand idly by as his family chipped away at the sanctuary we were supposed to build together. As the weeks turned into months, the dream of a happy married life in my beloved home was slowly being overshadowed by the looming nightmare of a family I couldn't seem to please and a husband who wouldn't stand up for me. The simmering tension reached a boiling point one balmy evening in late summer. Ethan and I were in the kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air. I was trying to recreate my mother's recipe, a nostalgic attempt to bring some warmth back into our home. Marianne and Anna had arrived unannounced, again, a pattern that had become all too common. As I set the table, Marianne's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the domestic scene. "Ethan, Anna and I have been thinking. We're in need of a change in scenery. We've decided it would be best if we moved in here with you two for a while." I froze, my hands trembling as I placed the cutlery down. Ethan looked up, surprised but not opposed. "Move in? For how long?" Marianne shrugged nonchalantly. "As long as we need. Besides, Kate could use some help around the house, don't you think? It's a bit much for her, managing such a big place." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My home, my sanctuary, was being invaded, and Ethan was considering it. I found my voice, though it was shaking. "Ethan, can we talk about this in private?" But before he could respond, Anna chimed in, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Okay, don't be such a worrywart. We're family. It's only natural we help each other out." Help. This wasn't help. This was a takeover. Ethan finally spoke, his words like a punch to my gut. "I think it's a good idea, Kate. Mom and Anna moving in might be what we all need." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "Ethan, this is our home. Don't I get a say in this?" His response was dismissive, a shrug that dismissed my feelings as trivial. "It's just for a while, Kate. It'll be fine." It wasn't fine, not by a long shot. The following weeks were a blur of unwelcome changes. Marianne and Anna moved in, bringing with them a storm of disruption. My once peaceful home was now a hub of constant noise, criticism, and intrusion. They took over the kitchen, the living room, rearranging furniture, redecorating without my consent, erasing the traces of my parents, of me. One morning, I found Marianne in the garden, uprooting the roses my mother had so lovingly tended. These old things needed to go. "Kate, we need something more vibrant, more alive," she said, not noticing the tears welling up in my eyes. Ethan, once my partner, seemed to shrink further into himself, becoming a spectator in his own home, leaving me to fend off the constant barrage of passive, aggressive comments and outright hostility. "Kate, you really should learn to relax more," Anna would say as she lounged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone while I cleaned around her. Or Marianne, her words slicing through me during dinner. "Ethan, you always were too good for this world, too good for the likes of, well, some people." Every day, my home felt less like mine. Every smile, every word from Marianne and Anna felt like an invasion, a claim staked on my life, my space. Ethan's silence was the worst betrayal of all, his indifference a clear sign of where his loyalties lay. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my house now occupied by those who saw me as an outsider, I realized that my marriage, my home, my life were slipping through my fingers. The dream of a happy, loving household was being crushed under the weight of unwelcome invaders, and I felt powerless to stop it. The once warm and inviting walls of my home now felt cold and alien, a stark contrast to the life I had envisioned. Marianne and Anna's presence was suffocating, their dominance over the house growing each day. I felt like a stranger in my own home, my opinions and feelings dismissed, my existence barely acknowledged unless it was to point out a flaw or a failing. My days began to mirror those of a modern-day Cinderella, except there was no fairy godmother coming to my rescue. I woke up early each morning to the sound of Marianne's demanding voice. "Kate, dear, don't forget to prepare breakfast. Ethan likes his eggs just so." She'd call out as if I hadn't been cooking for him for years. The list of chores seemed endless. Cleaning, cooking, organizing. Tasks that once brought me joy in my own home now felt like chains binding me to a life of servitude. Anna, ever the critic, never missed an opportunity to point out any perceived shortcomings. "Honestly, Kate, how hard is it to keep the house tidy? It's not like you have anything else to do," Anna remarked one afternoon, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. I clenched my jaw, holding back the tears. "I'm doing the best I can, Anna. This house is a lot to manage." But my efforts were never enough. My once loving husband, Ethan, had turned into a shadow of the man I married. He seemed to shrink further into himself, his once warm gaze now distant and cold. When I tried to reach out to him, to express my feelings of isolation and despair, his responses were short, void of the understanding and support I so desperately needed. "Kate, they're just set in their ways. Try to get along, for my sake," he'd say, avoiding my eyes. Even our meals, which used to be a time for us to connect, had turned into silent affairs, punctuated only by Marianne's and Anna's biting comments and criticisms. "Kate, this meal is a bit bland, don't you think? You really should take some cooking lessons," Marianne would say, her words laced with disdain. I felt trapped, my voice and spirit fading away under the constant barrage of belittlement and disregard. The house, once a symbol of my parents' love and my childhood memories, had turned into a prison. The echoes of laughter and love that once filled its rooms were replaced by the sound of Marianne's and Anna's unending critiques. Night after night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. How had I become a mere shadow in my own home, a specter of the vibrant, independent woman I once was? The realization that I had become a modern-day Cinderella, bereft of the magic that would transform my life, filled me with a deep, aching despair. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the weight of my unhappiness grew heavier. The light of hope that had once guided me through the toughest of times was now a distant flicker, barely visible through the fog of my misery. The days blurred into a relentless cycle of servitude and emotional exhaustion. Marianne and Anna's ever-tightening grip on my home and life had left me feeling like a hollow shell. The once vibrant Kate, who laughed easily and loved deeply, was now a distant memory, replaced by a woman who moved through her days mechanically, weighed down by despair. It was on a particularly gray afternoon, the sky heavy with unshed rain, that Marianne decided to strike the final blow. She entered the kitchen with a sense of purpose, her hand clutching a sheaf of papers. "Kate, we need to talk," Marianne began, her tone serious. She laid the papers on the kitchen table, the stark white of them a stark contrast to the worn wood. I looked at the papers, then up at her. "What's this about?" Marianne's lips twisted into a semblance of a smile. "It's about this house. It's clear you're struggling to maintain it. It would be best if the house was under my care. I've drawn up some papers for you to sign it over to me." I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. "Sign it over. This house is my home, my inheritance. I can't just give it away." Marianne leaned in, her eyes cold and calculating. "It's for the best, dear. You'll still live here, of course, but the burden of ownership will be lifted from your shoulders." Her words were like venom, and I struggled to keep my composure. "No, Marianne, I won't sign anything." Just then, Ethan walked in, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" Marianne turned to him, her voice smooth as silk. "I was just explaining to Kate how much easier things would be if I managed the house." Ethan looked at me, then at the papers. His next words were like a dagger to my heart. "Maybe that's not a bad idea, Kate. It might be easier for you." Easier for me, or easier for him? I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring within me. "You want me to sign over my family home to your mother?" His gaze faltered, and he shifted uncomfortably. "It's just—" "I won't do it, Ethan. This is my home, my parents' legacy," I interrupted, my voice rising with a mixture of anger and desperation. Marianne's expression hardened. "Think about it, Kate. This could solve a lot of problems." But I was resolute. My answer is no. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan's lack of support, his willingness to side with his mother, was a betrayal I couldn't comprehend. The man I had married, who had vowed to be my partner, now stood against me. As they left the kitchen, Ethan's parting words were a chilling reminder of the stakes. Think about it, Kate. If you don't, things might have to change between us. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down on me, I realized that the battle for my home was also a battle for my dignity and self-respect. I was at a crossroads, and the path I chose would define not just the fate of my home, but of my very soul. The ultimatum had been laid out like a guillotine, ready to sever whatever was left of my dwindling spirit. The following days were a haze of inner turmoil. Ethan's words, echoing his mother's manipulative intentions, replayed in my mind, a constant reminder of my eroding marriage and the life I had once cherished. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, Ethan approached me. There was a seriousness in his demeanor that I hadn't seen before. "Kate, we need to talk about the house situation," he said, his voice low. I braced myself. "Ethan, I already told your mother. I'm not signing the house over. It's all I have left of my parents." He sighed, a sound of frustration rather than understanding. "I know it's hard for you, but think about us, about our future. Signing the house over might be the best thing for everyone." "Best for everyone? Or best for your mother?" I countered, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. Ethan's expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable, Kate. This is about making things easier. If you refuse, it could mean the end of our marriage." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt clouding my vision. "You're threatening me with divorce over a house?" "It's not just about the house," he snapped. "It's about you being part of this family, about making compromises." Compromises. The word felt like a mockery. I had compromised my happiness, my peace, and my dignity. And now, he was asking me to compromise the last piece of my identity. I shook my head, a sense of clarity cutting through the fog of despair. "No, Ethan. I won't be bullied into giving up my home. I won't be bullied by you or your mother." The air between us crackled with tension. Ethan's next move was something I never thought him capable of. In a moment of heated frustration, he raised his hand and slapped me across the cheek. The sound echoed through the room, a stark, painful reminder of how far we had fallen. I recoiled, my hand flying to my stinging cheek, my heart breaking in my chest. He immediately looked regretful, his eyes wide with shock at his own actions. "Kate, But the damage was done. The man who had promised to love and protect me had just shattered the last vestige of trust and love I had for him. Tears streaming down my face, I found my voice, stronger and more resolute than I had felt in months. "Get out, Ethan! I want you and your mother and sister out of my house, now!" Ethan stood there frozen, as if he couldn't comprehend the turn of events, but I was done. Done with the manipulation, the emotional abuse, and the betrayal. That night, after they had left, the house felt eerily silent, like a battlefield after the war. I sat alone in the darkness, my cheeks still throbbing, my heart aching. But amidst the pain and betrayal, there was a flicker of something else, a spark of the old Kate, the one who wouldn't be broken, who wouldn't be cowed. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I went to the police station, my resolve firm. I filed a report for domestic violence and sought legal advice on how to protect my home and my rights. It was the hardest step I had ever taken, but as I walked out of the police station, a small sense of empowerment began to take root. I had reached my breaking point, but in doing so, I had also found my strength. The days following my visit to the police station were a whirlwind of emotions and actions. I had stepped into an arena I never thought I would have to face. The legal system. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the constant tension that had filled it for months. In the silence, I found a moment to breathe, to gather the scattered pieces of myself. The legal process was daunting, a labyrinth of paperwork and procedures. But with each step, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was no longer the silent sufferer in my own home. I was taking a stand, not just for myself, but for the dignity that had been stripped away from me. The trial was set, and as the day approached, my nerves were a tangled mess. Sitting in the courtroom, waiting for the proceedings to begin, I felt like I was in a dream, a surreal, heart-pounding dream. The judge's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. We are here to address the charges of domestic violence against Mr. Ethan Miller and the alleged attempts to coerce Mrs. Kate Miller into relinquishing her property. Ethan was there, looking smaller, less formidable than the man I had married. His mother and sister sat beside him, their faces a mix of anxiety and defiance. As the evidence was presented, the reality of what I had endured hit me. The police report, the photos of my bruised cheek, the statements from a few neighbors who had noticed the change in the atmosphere at my home. The weight of it all made my heart ache. Then it was my turn to speak. Standing before the judge, my voice wavered at first. Your Honor, I never thought I would be standing here. I loved Ethan. I trusted him. But what I experienced was not love. It was control, manipulation, and abuse. Ethan wouldn't meet my gaze. His lawyer's attempts to downplay the events, to paint them as mere marital disputes, felt like a final insult. The judge was stern as he delivered the verdict. Mr. Miller, the evidence against you is compelling. This court finds you guilty of domestic violence. You are sentenced to 5 years in prison. A gasp went through the courtroom, but I felt an odd sense of calm. Justice was being served. Marianne and Anna were ordered to pay a significant sum in compensation for their part in the harassment and emotional distress they had caused. As they stood, their faces etched with anger and disbelief, I realized they had never expected to be held accountable for their actions. After the trial, I stood outside the courthouse, the sun warm on my face. The journey had been harrowing, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient. A reporter approached me, a young woman with a sympathetic gaze. Mrs. Miller, how do you feel about the verdict? I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine smile form on my lips. I feel free. It's not just about the verdict. It's about reclaiming my life, my home. It's about showing that no one has the right to take away your dignity, yourself. As I walked back to my car, the house that once felt like a prison now beckoned me as a sanctuary once more. I knew there would be challenges ahead, healing to be done. But I also knew that I had taken the first crucial steps towards a new life, one where I was no longer a victim, but a survivor, a woman who had found her voice and her strength